Okay, so thank you for that wonderful introduction, Gudmundur, and thank you so much to everybody for coming today. It's a great pleasure to see so many people here, and I'm coming to talk to you primarily about something that I'm really excited about. So I'm going to do a little bit of time introducing myself, just so you have a bit more information about the journey that I've been on, but then I want to spend most of our time thinking about this question, which is, can we make a difference? And there's a spoiler alert, because I wouldn't be here, I don't think, unless the answer was that I believe we can. I think it's really important when we see all the difficulties in the world today, and we spend a lot of time thinking about the challenges like climate change, plastic pollution, conflict, injustice, to realise that there are real concrete things that we can each do to make a difference. And so that's what I'd like to spend most of our talk focusing on today. Okay, so let's dive straight in then and briefly tell you a little bit about myself. Gudmundur's already given me a very helpful introduction. The clicker is a little bit temperamental, but let's keep going. So, everyone starts somewhere, and this is where I started 43 years ago. That's my mum and dad. That isn't me with another woman and a different baby, although I do often get confused with my dad. So that was me. I was born in Bristol in the southwest of England, but quite shortly thereafter moved to the centre of England, to a town called Nottingham. I lived in the countryside. Nottingham is most famous as the location of Robin Hood. So I don't know if you know Robin Hood, living in Sherwood Forest and robbing from the rich to give to the poor. I never met him myself, but I did spend quite a lot of time in that part of the world, and it's a very pretty place. But as I grew up and I became something around your age, I had sort of two big things in my mind. One is that, as Gudmundur mentioned, I was really interested in mathematics. Not just because I found it fun, but also I was really sort of fascinated by the idea that there were these sort of underlying rules to how the universe worked. And it was really fascinating to sort of see, or start to see, those sort of patterns, and to feel like I could get beneath the surface and understand how things worked. But at the same time, I became increasingly aware that, unlike my sort of happy existence in my little village in Nottinghamshire, as you went further away and outside of the UK, increasingly there were greater and greater inequities and differences, and that many, many people, in fact the vast majority of people in the world, had a much more difficult existence than I did. And so that was a real troubling issue that I pondered over for a lot as I was growing up. I went to university in a beautiful northern town called Durham. It's the location for the Harry Potter movies, so you might have seen the cathedral or the castle without knowing it. I was based there, and I studied mathematics, so I continued to learn about maths there. That third picture isn't a mistake. That isn't also a bit of Durham. That is Uganda. And when I was in Durham, I had the opportunity to work for a summer volunteering in Uganda, helping children there. And that was an incredible sort of formative experience for me, seeing firsthand some of those issues that I'd thought about for a long time, and also understanding the sort of the beauty and the joyful, generous people of Africa who, through no fault of their own, were struggling in ways that I didn't have to. So that was a wonderful experience. And at the end of my time in university, I was feeling even more confused as to what I wanted to do. On the one hand, I was really excited and passionate about tech and AI and all these sort of things that are now very commonplace. But Google hadn't, I don't think, even been founded. So a lot of the world that you see hadn't really begun. But at the same time, the things that I cared about most were about sort of trying to address these global challenges. So I decided to take myself off to the other side of the world, to Japan, and give myself a couple of years to think about what I wanted to do. So I taught English in Japan. I also bought my first camera, so that's the very first photo I ever took with my new digital camera on one of my first days at school teaching in Japan. And at the end of that time, I'd taken a decision that I thought the most impactful way I could use my life was probably to try and work on those issues directly, and I thought probably one of the best ways I could do that would be to come and work for the UK government as a diplomat, which, as Gudmundur explained in the introduction, is kind of just a very sort of a strange word to use for people who essentially try to build bridges and build relationships between countries so that we can work better together on international problems. And that's what I'm doing here in Korea and have been for the last 4 years or so. I also, when I went back to apply for the Foreign Office, or the UK's Foreign Ministry, very shortly after I met my lovely wife Harrian. That's a picture of our first visit to Seoul 20 years ago. It was very cold, which explains why there's a small bear keeping my ears warm. And then full circle, this is the next generation, this is our new family, and a couple of years ago, you obviously, they've grown up slightly, but that's our existence in Seoul. So I think that is more than enough about me. So let's move on then, and I'd like to talk now about choosing a path. So I think somebody's probably actually kindly moving the slides on for me, but let's move on. So I just wanted to show you this number first. So you may not have thought about this, but the average career lasts about 80,000 hours. Now, that's quite a long time. You know, you spend 40 years or more of your adult life working. Most of your waking hours you'll spend working, and that adds up to a real significant amount of time. So in addition to obviously making sure that you have a comfortable life and a safe and secure family, there's a lot of opportunity in that time to choose to do something beyond just your immediate priorities and to make a difference. And as I've already said, I thought that the best way I could do that, at least initially, would be through becoming a diplomat. And that has proved to be a really interesting, varied and meaningful career for me. I've had the chance to work on some very important issues, decisions and events. Both sad ones, so I've responded to quite a lot of crises around the world. This is a picture of the 2011 tsunami, earthquake and nuclear triple disaster, if you like, that happened in northeast Japan. I was there the next day helping to find foreigners who'd been affected and to try and get them to safety. And I've dealt with a range of other crises as well. But I've also worked on much more sort of happy events, if you like. So you may have seen that the Korean president recently visited the UK on a state visit, so as a guest of the King of England, King Charles. And Blackpink were also there receiving awards for their work with the UK on climate change, so that was pretty good fun. And I've been planning that event for most of the last 6 months, really. So that was a big event that I worked on as well. And in the next slide, you can see that I really was there. And Leah thought I looked a bit like a penguin in this picture, but I was as part, mostly behind the scenes, but I occasionally got to be involved in the events as well. So let's now dive into the real question about making a difference. And I'd like to talk about that theme that Gudmundur mentioned about inequality. So let's look at this football here. And this picture represents the global wealth. So all of the things that are worth something to somebody, mostly that's money, but it could also be property or other kinds of assets. And immediately what you can see is that there's one big blob here. The United States accounts for almost a third of global wealth. Okay, so there's about 333 million people living in the US, and they have about a third of the global wealth. Then that big blue section there is Asia. China's a big chunk. Japan, South Korea, India, all big parts of that. And the green section is Europe, and you've got the UK, France, Germany, etc. in there. And then a few other little peripheral countries around the bottom of the football. But that yellow strand that you can see there represents everybody else. And on this football there are 50 named countries. And there are 145 countries in that little thin strip that have less than 3% of global wealth. So 50 countries have 97% of global wealth. Now let's look at people. And again, it's a very similar story. The top 10% of the global rich list, if you like, the top 10% of people own 76% of global wealth. So if you're thinking of a bar chart, that top first percentile has 76%. Then the next 40%, so taking us down to the halfway mark, they own another 22% of global wealth. That is a total of 98% of all the wealth of the world is owned by that top half of the bar chart. And the bottom 50%, well, they're crammed in that little corner there with only 2%. Okay? But you think that looks bad, it's actually even worse than this. Because if we move on, you'll see that actually the top 1%, I've moved the little guy into a corner of his own, they own 46% of all the global wealth. So you just see that figure there enjoying all of that purple area. That's the top 1%. And I have to say, it's very likely that many of us in this room are parts of families who are in that figure, because almost every family in Korea and in the UK are certainly in that top 10%, almost every of the families in our countries. And many will be actually in that purple section as well. So you can see the inequity there. And then I'm not going to spend too long on this chart, but opportunity and what countries are willing to spend in supporting the health and well-being of their citizens is very different as well. So very quickly, and I know this might be a bit difficult at the back of the room to see, but in this cone, which isn't to scale, you see at the top that the United States government is willing to spend about $12.5 million to save the life of one of its citizens through making an intervention, spending taxpayers' money on road safety. So if they think that by spending that much money they will save a life, then they'll spend it. Similarly, in Korea, the Korean government will spend around $3.5 million if it thinks that it will save the life of one of its citizens. In the UK, in our National Health Service, so the UK's hospital system, the most expensive treatment costs $2.4 million to save a life. And in Switzerland, there was recently a new cure for a particularly difficult kind of blindness that was approved, and that costs $850,000 in order to cure one person of blindness. But I want to direct your attention to the bottom of the cone, please. And if you can see it, the second section from the bottom here is the cost to save a life from malaria in East Africa, and that can be as low as $2,300. I was going to test your mathematics, but I think in the interest of time, I'll just tell you that that is 4,000 times less than the cost of saving a road traffic accident in the US. And at the very bottom of the cone, you can do a cataract surgery in Nepal or other low-income countries for around $25 to $50 and prevent somebody from going blind. So that is an incredible 20,000 times cheaper than that Swiss eye surgery. In other words, we could use the same amount of money to save one road traffic accident in the US as we could to save 4,000 lives in East Africa, and we could use the same amount of money to save one Swiss blindness as we could to save 20,000 people from going blind in low-income countries. I hope you'll agree with me that that is a pretty stark difference. So I'd like to do a little thought experiment with you, okay? Imagine you've just had a birthday and your mum and dad have been very generous, and your friends as well, and they've got you the best new trainers in town and a really nice swanky new outfit. Maybe you've got a new bag or a rucksack. Maybe it's even from Gucci, who knows. And you're wandering around Seoul and you're feeling pretty proud of yourself, and you're looking around and people's heads are turning and they're nodding admiringly. And you get to the Cheonggyecheong, the river, the little shallow stream that runs through the centre of Seoul. Hopefully most of you know where that is. But anyway, a little narrow, shallow stream, and you're wandering along and there's nobody else nearby. And then you suddenly see in the stream that a small child is splashing about in the middle. and they look to be in distress. You can see that they seem to be drowning, and there's nobody about. Only you are there. Now, I want to ask you, would you be willing to jump in and save that child's life? If you do, you won't be at any risk yourself because you can swim and it's very shallow, but you're probably going to ruin your outfit. You know, you're going to lose all your birthday presents and, you know, whatever they cost, maybe that posh rucksack or those trainers. But I'd like a show of hands to see who would be willing to jump in and rescue that child. Okay, that's pretty good. Who would rather stay on the side of the river? Okay, thank you for your honesty. Okay, that is really, really useful. And I think I would probably with you, the majority on this. I think I would probably jump in and save the child. And if you did, you'd probably be in the papers the next day, and, you know, Dulwich student saves small infant, and, you know, I'm sure you'd be a bit of a hero. So there'd be other dispensations as well. But I think, you know, most of us feel instinctively that, you know, saving the child is more important than, you know, losing, some amount of items that are of some value to us. But the actual reality is that all of us are actually in that same situation every single day, because without even getting wet, for a small outlay compared to the wealth that we have, we can pretty much guarantee that we will save the life of a small child, and actually do all sorts of other great things as well. But why do we not feel that that's the same? Well, there could be a few reasons. The first thing is we don't see the child that we save. If we give money to an effective charity that can save a child's life, and that child isn't immediately in front of our eyes, so we don't see them in distress, and we'll never meet them, and we probably won't get any credit, we won't be in the newspapers. But other than that, I personally fail to see much difference. You know, they are still a valuable human being, they still have so much potential, and they are in need of our help. So I think this is an interesting thought experiment, and it's one of the reasons that after quite a lot of thinking over a number of years, our family decided to take a pledge that we were going to give 10% of our income at least over the rest of our lives to effective charities that could do the most good in the world. And of course, because we don't see the impact of our work, we've created a little innovative solution in our house. So we've got our new little family that's made out of Lego. So we've got a Lego Trafalgar Square, and every time we manage to save another life, we put another little Lego figure on the square. And you can see it's getting sort of nice and cosy now. We're having to dig around in the Lego box to find the weird little figures that we'd consigned to the bottom of the box. But that's the way that we approach things. And, you know, I've talked to you about, on that cone, about one of the really effective ways that we can save a life, and that's really the core reason why I'm here to speak to you today. So let's get into the final but most important section, which is about fighting malaria. Now, let's tell you a bit about the problem. So malaria, I think most of you will have heard of malaria. You probably know that it's a disease that is carried by mosquitoes, and it can be a deadly disease, particularly for those in prevalent areas who often lack the medical systems and the wealth and support to treat it effectively. And malaria is one of the world's biggest killers. Malaria kills 625,000 people every year. And of those, almost 80% are children under the age of 5. And many of the others are young pregnant women whose immune systems are compromised whilst they're pregnant, and so they can't fight off the disease as well as they might otherwise. And so when they die, of course, their unborn babies die with them. So it is a tragic disease that affects a huge number of people. That's the equivalent of one child dying every minute of the day. Okay, and I've been speaking probably for about 20-25 minutes, so that's the whole front row wiped out here. And over the course of the day, since you wake up, from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, about the same number of people died from malaria as the entirety of Dulwich, Seoul, all of its students and all of its teachers. Okay. Now, it's not just the deaths that are the tragedy. Over 240 million people get sick every year, and I'm not talking about getting a bit of a cold or a flu. This is debilitating sickness where they are close to death. They probably need really dramatic interventions to save their lives, and in the countries they live, that might be very expensive. It might mean that they have to sell all of their possessions, and therefore they may also be pushed into further deeper poverty. And 300 million people each year miss work through sickness caused by malaria or by caring for somebody who has malaria. And so every dollar that we spend fighting malaria also creates $12 worth of benefit to African and other low-income countries in terms of preventing some of these harms. Now, we are working on a vaccine, and there's a lot of good efforts going in to trying to find a vaccine that can cure malaria finally. We're not there yet. I actually have a good friend who's working on this at the University of Oxford, and there have been some really good progress made in recent years. But the challenge is that the vaccines at the moment aren't effective enough, and they're also really hard to move about. They need to be kept in really cold storage, and it's very hard to do that and distribute those vaccines across some of these hot and areas with poor infrastructure. So for now, the most effective way that we can help with malaria is a very simple, cost-effective solution, and that is bed nets. Mosquitoes bite mostly between the hours of 10 and 2 a.m. at night. And so if you are under a net with insecticide on that net, so if the mosquito lands on the net, it will die, then you are protected. And in areas where bed nets have been distributed, there is around a 50% drop in the amount of malaria found. And that means 50% less people dying, 50% less people getting sick, 50% less people who are then in a position to pass on malaria by being bitten and then that mosquito going on to bite someone else. So that is a huge impact, and every net costs only around $2 or 2,500 won. So it's very cheap and cost effective. I talked about not all actions being created equal, and the difference in cost between spending in the US on road safety and spending on saving lives from malaria. But all charities are also very different in their impact. And there are some charities which have very little impact, I have to say. They may pay their staff a lot of money. They may not focus very much on measuring their impact. In some cases, there have been documented cases of charities actually doing more harm than good through maybe well-intentioned efforts, but poorly judged, and they've actually made the problem worse rather than better. So if we were giving to charity, I feel we should be spending just as much focus on the money that we spend as we do when we spend for ourselves. We wouldn't buy a house that we didn't know whether it was going to fall down or not. We wouldn't buy food that we thought may be tasteless or may even poison us. We wouldn't invest in a bank that looked as if it wasn't going to pay the money back. But why is it that so many of us give to charity just for that sort of fuzzy feeling of maybe doing something nice and do spend little attention on what the charity actually does? And so I have done a lot of research into effective charities, and I want to introduce to you, as Gudmunda has already mentioned, the Against Malaria Foundation, which is the Blackpink or the Sonheung-min of charities. It is the world's leading charity and has been for about the last 15 years in terms of cost effectiveness, of saving the most lives for every dollar donated. Now, there are a number of reasons why it's so good. I won't spend a lot of time talking about them, but one is every dollar, every cent, every won goes to buying nets. So most of the people that work for it are volunteers, and all of its costs are covered by corporate donations. So people are giving their services for free so that AMF can spend every dollar that's given on nets. So it's very efficient. It's also very data-driven and transparent, which is one of the reasons I, as a mathematician, am very interested in it. You can see immediately when you donate how many nets you've bought, where they are in the distribution chain, which country they're going to, and when the nets are distributed, you can even see the photos of the nets installed. So it's super transparent, which is something that lots of people worry about when they give to charity. But it's super transparent, it's super cost effective, and it's very accountable. And for that reason, research organisations that look at effective charities have voted it for 15 years one of the world's top charities. And as Gudmundur mentioned, I was sitting around at home during COVID, feeling a bit hopeless because there was nothing I could really do. It wasn't possible to volunteer here in Korea because you couldn't go out to meet anybody, you couldn't have any contact. And I'd been giving to AMF for a while, and I'd also noticed that it was very difficult in Korea to give cost effectively to some of the world's best charities. Most of them didn't have a branch here, and if you wanted to give for people who were earning an income, you couldn't get tax deductibility, which is one of the main drivers that people give here in Korea. So I proposed to the CEO, the head of that organisation in the UK, to set up a branch of AMF in Korea. And I'm delighted to say that with the help of lots of wonderful people, including many Dulwich teachers, for which I'm immensely grateful, over 2 years we finally managed to get AMF Korea established. And only at the end of the last month we finally got authority from the tax service here in Korea that all donations to AMF would be tax deductible. And AMF has already globally saved almost is funded almost 250,000 nets, protected almost 250 million nets, protected 500 million people, saved around 185,000 lives, prevented about 185 million cases of malaria, and helped the African economy by about $6.5 billion. But even though that looks great, there are many, many people who are falling asleep at night without any protection from malaria in those areas that need it most. This is a very neglected problem where there is a big gap in funding between what is needed and what is currently being given. And therefore, we can all make a difference through supporting the work of AMF and AMF Korea. And so that's why I'm here really, is to ask you for your help. Now, Dulwich has already been extremely generous, both in giving me this opportunity to talk to you today and also in designating AMF Korea as one of the causes that you're going to be supporting for this year, and I hope maybe even in the future too. We need all of your help, actually, in order to make AMF successful. It's no point having a charity if nobody knows about it. It's no point having a charity if nobody gives. And I'd love it if you would consider starting a conversation with your friends and your family about effective giving and some of the causes that we've talked about today. We're going to be running some events and activities that hopefully will raise funds for AMF over the year ahead. And it would be great if you could get involved with that too. I'd love to hear your ideas of how we could change Korean society more generally and encourage more people to think about giving and about spending their lives also focusing on making a meaningful impact. Korea has gone from desperate poverty 2 generations ago, and also actually having a lot of malaria here on the Korean peninsula itself, through to an incredible situation where they're now the 10th richest country in the world. And now, finally, Korea has a wonderful opportunity to give back. And all of us in this room can be part of that. And I think there's been nothing for me in my life more rewarding, more exciting, more meaningful than the opportunity to be involved in this work. And it's very much the start of a journey here in Korea, but I'd love to go on that journey with each of you. And let's all, regardless of whether it's to do with malaria or whatever the cause that you feel passionate about, please do think about how you can spend these next few years in school and when you go to university, thinking about how you would like to make a difference in your lives as well. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much indeed.
Great, thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing, coming here and sharing your incredible journey so far. The Against Malaria Foundation, there is a website that people can go to and visit to find out more?
Absolutely. In fact, we've only sort of just taken that out of beta. I can provide a link. I don't have it in the presentation, but if you Google Against Malaria Foundation Korea, it should be the top result. And we'll make sure that we share that to anyone interested.
Thank you, and I encourage you all to have that conversation, that important conversation with your friends, with your family members. Because as Graham points out, we are all in a very privileged position here in this room and here in this school. And we have the ability to make those kinds of differences that others maybe cannot. I'd like to invite Graham to sit with me. Graham, please take a seat. And I'm going to start off by asking you a couple of questions about your journey and experience so far. And then, of course, we'll open up to the floor. I'd like to start off by asking you, you've had these diverse experiences in so many different fields and different areas. And how do you go about combining your passion? You've got a full-time job working in the British Embassy, and then you're supporting these good causes, the important work that you do with the Against Malaria Foundation. How do you manage to balance your interest in international relations, your balance in making a positive difference in the world in the way that you do?
Well, thanks. It's a really good question. I'm really fortunate that actually the job that I do, and I did sort of allude to this a little bit, but it does give me a lot of opportunities to work on these sort of issues. So that's one of the really exciting things, is that there are often ways that I can find a synergy between my work and my sort of wider interests. So for example, the UK Embassy does a lot of work with Korea to try and develop, a slightly odd phrase, but develop a broader partnership on development. So working together overseas to help countries in low-income situations on all of these sort of issues, global health and well-being, for example. So there might be opportunities there in time for causes like AMF Korea to be part of that growing relationship between the two countries, as Korea is looking to increase the amount of money that it spends on aid and development overseas, and is looking for Korea-based organisations that can be part of that solution. So that's one way, is trying to find ways that I can either benefit my work in the embassy from the work that I do with AMF, or vice versa. And then I also try and bring mathematics in as well. So in almost every role that I've done, and I've done lots of different things in the UK Foreign Ministry so far, I've tried to combine my love of data and evidence with the job that I've been working on, and try to find ways of demonstrating and challenging our current policies through new data streams and new analysis. And so I can talk a bit more about that maybe later, but that's had some really interesting, that's brought about some really interesting opportunities to make a difference to some of these causes that I care about.
Fascinating. What would you say today is your proudest achievement, Graham, of all the things that you've done in making positive impacts in the work that you do primarily as a diplomat?
So in my job as a diplomat, I would say that it's been a real privilege to work on all sorts of different issues. The thing that has been the most tangible, I would have said, is the 5 years that I spent when we were based in Japan, but I was covering the whole of East Asia, and I was covering consular and crisis work. Now, consular work just means helping British nationals in this case in difficulty overseas. So that could be that they've been a victim of crime, they've become very sick, maybe they've committed a crime themselves and they're in prison, or they have a mental health illness, or all sorts of different situations. Maybe they're involved in a crisis. So that meant that day to day I was meeting people in difficult situations and very tangibly being able to be a small part of helping to make that situation worse, including some sort of life and death situations as well. So that felt incredibly meaningful and a real privilege to be involved in. But a lot of the other things that you do is when you work in government, when you work in policy, trying to think about good measures that are going to make the world or our countries better in slower time, you often don't see the immediate impact of that work. So it's less tangible, it's no less important, and it can be very measurable, but it's a different kind of reward, and it often comes a lot later on.
Thank you. Now we'll open up to the floor, your opportunity to ask Gray questions.
So, could you tell us what do you think has contributed to your own success?
Okay, what's contributed to my own success? That's a very good question. I'm not sure I completely know the answer, and I wouldn't necessarily say that I've been universally successful. I think every career, has a lot of successes and failures, and stumbling blocks, as well as moments where things work out really well. So what I would say is a consistent theme, and I think something that people have appreciated about the work that I've done in the jobs that I've done, is that I bring a bit of a different perspective than many of my colleagues. So a lot of the people that work in diplomacy come from a history or an economics or a politics background, and they know a lot more than I do about a lot of those issues. So that's one of my weaknesses, I guess, as a diplomat, is I know less about those areas, but what I do have is the mathematics background and this focus on evidence and challenging the status quo. And I try and do that in a sort of a friendly and constructive way, but I try to not take at face value the ideas that we have already about certain policy areas. I try to find evidence either that our ideas are right or to challenge them and go in a different direction. And I think over the course of my career, in lots of different jobs, that's probably been the thing where I've been able to make do a better job or make a particular difference that maybe another person working in that job wouldn't have been able to. So maybe that would be my short answer to your question.
All right, and please tell us your name as well. When you are asking your question, introduce yourself as well. Next question.
What would you say was the most important thing you were doing when you were fighting malaria?
Brilliant. Well, I mean, I think the most important thing I've done so far has been very simple. It's just been to give money to effective causes that are fighting malaria. So up to now, the impact that I've had has been mostly just through giving over a period of time to AMF and other charities who are working on other issues like malaria that have a disproportionate impact in some of the poorest parts of the world. So there are probably 4 or 5 issues in addition to malaria which are really important and that really affect people mostly in Africa and cause a lot of deaths and sicknesses. But so far that's been the most important thing, but I hope the most important thing will prove to be setting up AMF Korea. I hope that in doing so and in sharing AMF's story with lots of people here, that will encourage many more people to get involved and feel passionate about this issue, and that over time that will have a much bigger impact than anything I could do on my own. So I hope in 12 months I can give you a different answer to that question. Please help me to do that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Spina. So you mentioned that giving to others has brought you great happiness. Can you share a specific moment or experience where you felt the profound impact of your charitable contributions?
Well, thank you, Spina. That's a lovely, lovely question. I think the profoundest impact that I felt was actually just realising that I could have that, make that difference, and actually realising that I could do that at almost no actual real cost to myself. Now 10%, and it doesn't have to be 10%, you could give a bit of pocket money, there's no amount too small. You know, a bed net costs less than half a cup of coffee. So, and will really protect somebody and save a lot of sickness and suffering. But you know, the reality is that if you remember back to that chart where there were those few people occupying most of that territory, even if we took 10% of that territory away, they would still be in great comfort. And you know, all of my needs I'm very fortunate to say, are met with the income that we enjoy, and we have so many other privileges as well. So it was the recognition that actually I didn't just need to focus on whether to buy the next, you know, expensive brand clothing, or focus on having as good a car as the next person as me, or you know, climbing the ladder and having a bigger income actually really didn't matter. And actually I was already had everything that I needed, and I could now focus my attention on something that felt a lot more meaningful, which was in addressing some of that imbalance. So I think every month I get a little email from AMF. It's automated. They're not sending it by hand, but they're thanking me for my donation. And every time that lands, it's a nice reminder that no matter how difficult a week I've had at work, you know, no matter whether the thing I'm working on feels very meaningful or whether it feels a bit boring, that, you know, 10% of the time that I've spent, so roughly an afternoon or a morning a week, has, you know, gone to, you know, protecting people from malaria. And so that gives me a lot of comfort and encouragement, even when I'm having a difficult time in my job.
Okay. So I was just wondering, how would you say has being a diplomat and also working on your passions regarding charity changed your view of the world and like your perspective of it?
Thank you. So in good ways and bad, I think. So I think before you work for government, it's very hard to understand really how government works. And I've been encouraged by many of the things I've learned. So lots and lots of very nice, well-intentioned people work for government and do public service. So there are lots of great people that I work with, and they're very committed to the causes they work on. But there's also a lot of difficulty in making real difference. The system can move quite slowly, and also there's a lot of realities of the way the world works, of the balance of power between different nations, of all the national interests, that can mean it's very frustrating sometimes when the clear solution that seems to make sense is almost impossible to get to. So there can be frustrations, but there's also a lot of positives, and there are lots of opportunities. They don't come around every day, but they do happen where you really see the fact that, you know, the intervention that you've made has actually had a real tangible difference. So that's been, I would say, some of the most important insights that I've had. Was that the question, or was there another part to it? Sorry, I mean, one thing I would say is I was never a conspiracy theory believer, but now seeing how government works, I'm even less of a conspiracy theorist. So I think, you know, the reality is most of the things that you see happen in the world, most of the things where things go wrong are a matter more of incompetence or human failure than of a great master plan. That said, I think countries can achieve a huge amount by working together, and even though they're imperfect, the plans that we make in the international space, including at climate conferences such as the recent COP28, these do make a real difference. And you know, you can't work in government if you're entirely idealistic and unwilling to compromise. You do have to be able to accept that you might get 50% of the way to solving a problem, but that's still going to be 50% more than if we don't try. Thank you for your question. Let's go over here now, and then I think we had someone else in the middle of the room. So third row here, thank you. Sorry if I'm missing any hands. And then, yes, we've got some people at the front.
I think we've got time for about 2 or 3 questions. 3 questions.
How did your experiences growing up and working as a diplomat change your perspective on like privilege and like global inequalities, and how did that lead you to engage in giving to charity and charity?
So thank you. I think that's quite a related question. So I think at some point, I think most of us probably start our career under a lot of pressure, or we grow up under a lot of pressure to compete with each other, and we see what success looks like, what our society tells us about success. And I was no different, and I wanted to be successful, and I could have gone into a much more sort of high-paying career in tech. But you know, I won't lie to you. There's lots of good things about being a diplomat, and now we live overseas. We have a nice house, and our kids get to go to a wonderful school. And I couldn't afford to do that if I was just paying for those benefits out of my salary. So there's lots of great things about being a diplomat. I'm very, very privileged. But I just think I've realised that you know, the more I've come into contact with global issues, the more I've realised that that is such an unusual situation. And just because we sit in a room of people who are all in that situation, we might feel that that's the norm, but it really isn't. And again, it's so hard for us to envision these vast inequalities, but they really do exist, and that is the reality of our world today. And I think as soon as I was confronted with that sufficiently, I realised that I couldn't, in good conscience, just keep focusing on getting richer. And I needed to focus on something more than that. And that's why we took the decision that we did, and that's why I feel so driven to work on these sort of causes.
Hi, my name is Ealing, and my question is, was there a certain event in your life that made you start wanting to battle economic injustice, and more specifically help those with malaria?
Brilliant question. I wouldn't say that there was a specific event, but there were certainly things that made me even more committed. One of them was what I showed a little while earlier, my trip to Uganda, and recognising just the scourge, the blight, there are lots of complicated words for it, but essentially the difficulties that that malaria was wreaking on that continent. So that definitely was one of the big motivating factors. And I think there are smaller life events as well that make a difference, like becoming a parent and recognising that, I have a responsibility to ensure that the world that my children inhabit and grow up in is a little bit more equitable than the world that I have found. And so that's a driver as well. Lots of different little moments, but I think it's been a growing realisation over time.
Where can you buy the mosquito trap nets thingy?
So, great question. It's super easy. So foundations like the Against Malaria Foundation buy these nets in bulk. They buy them millions at a time or hundreds of thousands at a time. So the easiest way to do it is just to make a donation of as little as $2 to Against Malaria Foundation, and you'll see the net that you've bought. And you'll see where it's going. Of course, you can physically buy malaria nets in Korea and make sure you don't get bitten at night, but you won't be really helping yourself that much beyond being a bit less itchy. So I would say the best way is definitely to buy a net via the foundation online. And did that spark a very quick follow-up? Go on. Just very quickly, come on.
Is there any cases where you can have malaria but be asymptomatic?
It's a good question. Can you be asymptomatic? You can certainly be less affected, and some people with healthy immune systems or who are just lucky can get over it, and it feels like a bit of a bad cold. But equally, it can be fatal. So it's a very serious disease.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Graham. Great questions, fantastic questions. Just on a personal front, a friend of mine actually contracted malaria in Serbia when I was there during the winter break, and what they're seeing is that they're seeing a rise in malaria cases in Europe. And of course, the word malaria comes from Latin malaria, bad air. The fens on the Italian peninsula used to generate lots of malaria cases in the area. And it seems to me that as a result of the changing climate, the climate emergency, that malaria is spreading further into parts of the world that haven't experienced malaria. So the work that the Against Malaria Foundation is doing, of course, is of vital importance, and the work that scientists and researchers are doing. Hopefully, one day be able to find that vaccine cure.
Yeah.
So thank you. Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you very much.